Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-09-26. Story 1, a pre-Halloween warning, there are no friendly spirits. Halloween, as a concept, is not particularly new, in fact, it's very, very old. It's also not a distinctly Western holiday. I mean, yes, Halloween as we know it is, with the candy and dressing up and carving pumpkins, those are all pretty much exclusively European. The idea behind Halloween, though, is fairly ubiquitous. Plenty of cultures celebrate a time of year when our world and the spirit world draw closer together. Most places view this one of two ways: either it's a time when loved ones and long-lost family members come back to us, like Day of the Dead, or it's a time when we put up a bunch of protective rituals to keep away the things that go bump in the night. Halloween falls into the second category, which is why we wear masks and make jack-o'-lanterns to keep the malevolent spirits away. I can tell you without hesitation that both interpretations are correct. The story I'm about to tell you took place when I was just a teenager. I was living with my family. It was me, my two parents, my older brother and sister, and my grandmother. I'd had a younger sister, too, but she and my grandfather both died in a car accident several years earlier. We moved houses not long after. Our new house was much bigger. I think having a smaller, cozier house would have let us feel their absence too easily. In a large home, we could just dismiss their absence as them being in another room, even if we knew they weren't. Anyway, one Halloween, our whole family, minus Grandma, was gathered into the living room, where we had lit a fire and put a movie on for the evening. It was late, and the trick-or-treaters were starting to thin out. The movie was in a bit of a lull when there came a shriek from upstairs. Instantly, we all knew it was Grandma who had screamed, so we all ran up in a panic. As we climbed the stairs, we could hear her sobbing, and saying, "It's you. It's really, really you." She kept repeating that in a kind of hoarse cry as we made our way to her room. When we got there, she had fallen down onto the floor with her back against a wall, and she looked paler than any of us had ever seen her. Tears streaked her face, and her breath was ragged, but her expression was a mixture of bliss and excitement. Standing across the room, dressed in an old-fashioned suit and with a hat in his hands in front of him, stood my grandfather. I'm sure I don't have to tell you how stunned we all were. None of us were particularly superstitious, and even if we were, that's just not the sort of thing you ever expect to come across. Had I known then what I know now, I would have ordered him, out of our house that very minute. But I didn't. My mom was the first one to break down. Seeing her father again brought her to tears immediately, but my grandfather simply smiled and reassured her. We spoke for what felt like hours, hearing the story of how Grandma was in her room, getting ready for bed when she heard a tapping on the window. When she turned, she saw his face there, peeking in at her. She explained that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. When you lose someone you love, you see them everywhere. But when he didn't leave, and motioned for her to open the window, then climbed inside once she had, Grandma knew it wasn't the same. That was when she screamed, and we came in. After that, my grandfather regaled us with tales of the other side, how beautiful it is, how all your wildest dreams can't compare to the reality of it. I'd like to tell you that I was skeptical, but I was just happy to see my grandpa again. He explained how, when the time is right, spirits can come back to the land of the living, and there was so much superstition and ritual going on during Halloween that the barrier between our worlds grew thin. He apologized for not visiting sooner, claiming that he had tried many times, but that he simply hadn't been experienced enough until this year. And we all believed him. Once all this was finished, we agreed it was best if we left my grandparents alone to catch up. Grandpa stood up, turned to my grandmother, and reached out his hand. "I've got a lot to tell you. Come with me." He smiled as he said this, a warm, friendly smile. She took his hand, and together they walked down the hall and out of our sight. The rest of us went back downstairs, still shaken by what had occurred. We spent a long time in silence there, by the fire. Trick-or-treaters would still drop by, even more infrequently than before. Eventually, we got back to talking and joking, almost as though there weren't a ghost upstairs. It was the best night we'd spent together in years. Mother was just telling us a story about Grandpa when he was her age when the doorbell rang again. It was now going on 11 o'clock, so we weren't expecting any more children. A cry of trick or treat came from outside our door, though, so my mom stopped her story, and went to the door. My mom loved children. She peeked out of our front door window, and caught just a glimpse of the young girl standing there in a pink princess outfit. She swung the door open, not even waiting to get a full view of the girl before complimenting her costume. "Well, don't you just look at you." There was the sound of a bowl hitting the floor, and my mother froze mid-sentence. "What's wrong, Mommy?" The voice didn't come from any of us, it came from outside. My father, my older siblings and I all looked at each other before racing to the front door. When I got there, my heart leapt into my throat and tears filled my eyes. Standing in the doorway was my younger sister, Sarah, who had been killed in a car crash years earlier. Those of you who have shared a house with a young child can imagine how deeply their absence is felt. There is no aspect of life they don't affect in one way or another, and when she died, nothing was the same. And there she stood, not a day older, and not a mark on her body. I broke down crying. When I looked around, I saw that all my family was crying, and Sarah looked deeply troubled by it. "Did I do something wrong, Mommy?" That voice snapped us all back to the moment. "Of course you didn't, sweetie," my mother replied hurriedly, adding, "We just missed you. Can I come in now?" We let her in, of course. The family then talked as we hadn't talked in years. Sarah was just the same as she had ever been. Back then, I would have called her annoying, but that night she couldn't have annoyed me if she tried. Once we had been together for half an hour or so, Sarah looked towards my parents. "Mum? Dad? Can I show you something?" "Of course you can, honey," my mother breathed. She still had tears in her eyes. Sarah leapt off the couch. "Great. Come with me," she said, holding out both her hands for my mother and father to take. Suddenly, I realized that Grandma was still upstairs, and had no idea that Sarah had come back. So, I went upstairs to get her. When I got upstairs, I saw my grandfather coming out of a room quietly, and shutting the door behind him. When I asked where Grandma was, he told me she was resting. I asked if she could come downstairs, and he simply said that wouldn't be possible, before adding that she would have plenty of time to spend with Sarah. I was excited. Did this mean they were staying with us? I asked my grandfather, and he just smiled and went downstairs with me. My older siblings were chatting in the living room when Sarah came skipping in from around the corner. "Alone, where are Mom and Dad?" I asked. "Well, when we went to the basement, they started kissing and hugging, and told me to go back upstairs, so I did." That didn't sound right. I couldn't imagine my mother leaving Sarah's side for a moment tonight. Nobody else seemed to find that strange, though. Grandpa just laughed and said that adults were weird and that I'd understand someday. Then he turned to my brother and said he had brought a gift with him, something to make up for all the lost birthdays and Christmases. He held out his hand for my brother to take. "Come with me." It was only at this point that I grew suspicious. I asked Grandpa where my gift was, to which he simply said, "Oh, don't you worry. You'll get yours soon enough." I urged my brother not to go with him, but he didn't listen. Taking my grandfather's hand, the two of them went down the hall together. Sarah turned to us, and said, "Mommy and Daddy have been down there a while. Let's go check on them." She reached out for us. "Come with me." My older sister reached for Sarah, but I slapped her hand away. "Billy. What the he? Don't go with her," I begged. "Come on, Meg," Sarah said, "Billy just doesn't want to see Mom and Dad kissing." Before I could stop her, Meg took Sarah's hand, and the two of them went downstairs to the basement. Grandpa started coming back down the hall, alone. His eyes met mine. "I've got your gift ready now, Billy. Come with me." I ran past him into my room and shut the door behind me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a cell phone yet, and there were no home phones in my room. They hadn't been openly violent yet, but how long was that going to last? All I could do was sit there and wait for them to either break in or leave. Heavy footsteps came down the hall and stopped just outside my door. My grandfather began calling me, begging me to come out so he could give me my present. A few minutes later, his voice was joined by Sarah's, asking me to come out and play with her. "Why don't you love me anymore, Billy? What did I do wrong?" She sounded like she was on the verge of tears. I can't possibly tell you how hard it was to stay in there, listening to my little sister beg me to play with her one last time. But the survival instinct is a strong one, and I kept the door shut. The clock chimed 12, and all fell silent. I looked under the door, and my grandfather's figure was no longer casting a shadow underneath. I placed my ear to the door, listening carefully. I heard nothing. My family was out there, possibly hurt. I had to go check, or call for help, do something, at least. I took a deep breath to steady myself, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. Across the hall, through the open door, I could see my brother lying on the ground, motionless. He was pale, and it didn't look like he was breathing. I was only in high school, but I ran over to him. I checked his wrists and his neck for a pulse, but found nothing. All I saw was that one of his hands was tinged black, as if necrotic. I ran upstairs. I should have called the police, or an ambulance, or somebody, but my mind wasn't working. I found Grandma in the same state, pale, not breathing, her hands slightly blackened. My heart was racing. I had to go to the basement. I couldn't go to the basement because I knew what I would find there, the rest of my family, lying pale and motionless, dead. I sat there for a long time, paralyzed, before I decided that I had to know. The descent to the basement felt longer than it ever had before. I felt cold and numb, and each step felt like an eternity. But when I got to the bottom, I saw exactly what I knew I would find: my parents, and my older sister all lying on the floor. I began to cry. Cry like I hadn't done in years, like I hadn't since the day my little sister died. "You stupid boy." The voice was sinister and evil, sounding just like every demon from every horror movie you've ever seen and worse. I spun around, and Sarah was there, but she was different. Her eyes were empty sockets, and her mouth was a black, lipless hole ringed with fangs. "You have no more family. No more loved ones. They all came with me. They're mine now. And you? You will live the rest of your life alone. You will die somewhere, forgotten, alone and afraid. You will never see your family again. Ever." Then the thing paused, and held out its hand. "Unless, of course, you come with me. You can be with us all again, forever." I'd like to tell you now that I kept my distance, that I told her to get out of my house, or at least that I sat frozen. But what she said was true. I felt it, deep in my bones. I would never see my family again if I didn't go with her. I was just a kid. A scared, stupid kid who wanted his mum. I stood shakily, and reached out my hand slowly. Sarah's mouth formed a sick facsimile of a smile as I approached. There was a noise upstairs. The clock chimed 1 o'clock, and I looked up, just for a heartbeat. There was a distant scream, and when I looked forward again, Sarah was gone. I called 911. It was eventually deemed that the family died of carbon monoxide poisoning, and that the leak had spontaneously resolved itself and dispersed through my grandmother's open window. My experiences were brought on by hysteria and oxygen deprivation. It could have been worse. They could have blamed me. I was legally an adult at that point, so the estate fell to me. I sold the house and everything in it and moved to a small apartment, using the proceeds to put myself through school once I graduated. If you see a loved one who has passed away this Halloween, please don't let them in. Don't take their hand, and never, ever go with them. You might be asking why I'm sharing this now. It's a fair question. For many years I've been terrified of the things that came to my house that night. For decades, I've thought that the scariest thing in the world was the idea that whatever came to visit, whatever we let into our home, they weren't my family. This year, though, I had a thought that was even more disturbing still. What if they were? Story 2, Milcom Electrical Solutions. The rolling blackouts started in our neighborhood when I had just moved into my grandparents' house. Nana and Gramps were weird when it came to electricity. They'd had an old blackened generator in their cellar for years, and while the quaint stained glass lamps flickered sometimes, they were as bright as they had always been when the houses next to us were dark. Like I said, my grandparents were weird when it came to electricity. They gave me a list of rules when I moved in, and pinned it to the mirror by my bed. The old, yellowed paper read the following. Rule 1. The generator downstairs will remain on at all times. Rule 2. During blackouts, the family will meet in the main sitting room where the generator is directly below. Rule 3. If men asking you to change electricity supplier approach you, do not engage in conversation. Do not, under any circumstances, give them access to the generator. 3 simple rules, I thought. Whatever, easy to follow. They were set in their ways, and I knew the elderly occasionally reacted to change with hostility. My grandparents stayed away from the other people in the neighborhood anyway. Not right, is what my grandfather would huff, and my grandmother's head would nod slowly in agreement. Everything was completely ordinary until I first encountered Milcom's Electrical Solutions. I saw their label on the front door of every single house in the neighborhood and wondered how they had managed to get everyone on the same supplier. It was an old town, full of an aging population. Change wasn't welcome here. The van parked outside our house for 3 weeks. I mentioned it to my grandparents and they pursed their lips, almost comically synchronized. Well, they've always been persistent. My grandma finally said quietly, her knitting needles clacking against each other. That was the end of it. I woke up at 7 a.m. the next day to knocking at the door. I opened it blearily, and 3 men were standing there in identical, oversized trench coats. The first thing that hit me was the smell. A burning, crackling electrical smell, like a rat fried on a telephone wire. Milcom Electrical Solutions. One of the men held out his hand. The skin on the end of his fingers sagged as if it was too big for his bones. I tucked my hands into my pockets, shivering. "Can I help you?" I asked shortly. The rules burned in my mind. Something wasn't right. Why, yes, I think you can. The men took out a piece of paper each as they spoke in unison, as if it was something they had rehearsed 1,000 times. Milcom Electrical Solutions give you so many options. Their mouths had begun to stretch into bizarre smiles. Their strange hands held the paper in front of them, but their eyes were trained on me. Like an animal, watching my every move. "We don't need it. Thank you." I shut the door in their face and as an afterthought, locked it. I walked upstairs, past my sleeping grandparents, and looked out the bathroom window which overlooked the front porch. The 3 men were looking up at me, their 3 identical smiles not quite reaching their eyes. I shivered, and closed the curtains. When I told my grandparents, a grim determination spread over their faces. Quietly, they made their preparations. My grandmother prayed with me like she did every afternoon before supper, but this time, her voice was fervent. It sounded like her voice was shaking. At 7, my grandfather brought out his old shotgun. It was almost comically bigger than him, a small stout man with his trousers belted firmly around his waist. The rolling blackouts started at 8 p.m., when the sun had gone down. They were different this time. The darkness was inky, and as we gathered in the living room, it felt like the darkness was seeping in like a liquid. I don't know why, but I looked out the window. I did it compulsively, checking over the drone of the television which was playing an old rerun of The Price is Right. The electricity from the generator whirred on, an old dogged determination about the flickering of the lights. Then, the screaming started. It wasn't the mock horrified screams of children chasing each other, neither the surprised scream of someone nearby who had dropped a pot of boiling water. It was the cold, desperate screams of someone who had seen something unimaginably terrible. I turned to the window. Outside, 3 faces were pressed up against the glass. The loose skin around their faces was cracking, in the pale light it looked almost rotted. They were smiling large, delighted smiles, but it didn't reach their dark eyes. "Let us in, Kara." Their voices were sing-songy, and buzzed like the wings of 1,000 insects. My grandmother's hand was on mine, gripping it with a surprising strength. My grandfather lifted his shotgun, aiming it at the wide, gaping mouths. "Now milk 'em," he said in his low gravelly voice. "You aren't ever coming in this house. You know that." The three faces widened in maniacal glee. "We'll find a way." They spoke in unison, their mouths barely moving. "And we'll be inside your wife and your pretty little granddaughter, in the crooks of their brain and everywhere else. We will even let you watch, old man, before we take you." A grey rotted tongue protruded out of each mouth, pressing against the glass as their dead eyes rolled into their head in pleasure at the thought of it. I clutched my grandmother's hand, but until then. The voices hissed. "We will settle for everyone else." Their loose skins wrinkled as they moved away in their slouching pace, towards the other houses, until the darkness swallowed them up and the screaming began again. I didn't think about saving anyone else. The grim silence of my grandparents told me there was no hope for anyone without power. The creatures would find them, slide into their skins and wear their lives, but they wouldn't quite fit. The cracks would show as the skin began to decompose. This is what they told me, quickly, painfully. My grandmother's knitting needles clacked and my grandfather polished his shotgun as we waited for the morning to come. "This is the only thing you can do. Get a generator, keep it running when it is dark. Don't trust anyone from Milcom Electrical Solutions, and if your neighbors look different, like their skins are just a little too big for them, don't venture out after dark. My grandfather says they're spreading. When they first came, it was a house at a time. Our whole neighborhood has been changed and I can't help anyone, but I can warn you. Follow the rules. That's all we can do." Story 3, a warning: don't ever buy a 999 Brazilian reais flight ticket. English is not my first language, but I'll do my best to tell my story. It's important. If you're in Brazil, don't ever buy a 999 Brazilian reais flight ticket. If you're not, before you plan your vacation, please verify the quotation. Today it is 244.09 American dollars. I should start from the beginning. It was about 5 weeks ago. My name is Ines and I used to live a very quiet, normal life, with my fiancé Miguel. I was at work, in my lunch break, and FaceTiming him. "So, babe," he said, while munching a Caesar salad, "I know it's sudden, but would you like to spend our next vacation in Portugal? I found tickets for a very good price online." I was a little taken by surprise, but agreed. Miguel was the wanderlust type. Me? Not so much. Sure, I like lazing around in a beautiful beach just like the next guy, but at the end of the day I want to be in my house. Sleep in my own bed. We had been together for 5 years and everything was great. Both of us made a decent income, me more than him, and were childless, so I always indulged tagging along with his love for traveling. Miguel and I went to Brazilians' most pretty places, and some other South American countries. We had never left the country since our currency is devalued, but I knew I had enough money for the trip he wanted. He started planning everything, his beautiful hazel eyes shining, looking like a kid that got exactly the toy they asked Santa for. I always let the details for him to handle. We lived together, so I would just listen to him talk excitedly about our destination every day. I was unaware of the exact cost of our ticket, hotel, or how much he appraised we would spend in food, souvenirs and such. When he told me total we would spend, I gladly agreed, since it was like 30% less than I was expecting. He assured me I would love our hotel, so I didn't ask anything else. When traveling, I always like to stay in a nice hotel and go to nice restaurants, not fancy stuff, but I believe good quality places are essential to enjoy a trip. Our vacation was going to be 26 days after he bought the ticket. It was weird to find tickets for a good price on such a short notice, but our country is in a serious economic crisis. Maybe the companies are trying harder to attract the middle class. Less profit is still profit. It was only when we woke up in the morning of our flight that I asked him, very casually, "So, sweetie, how cheap were the tickets?" More excited than ever, he replied, "It was just 999 reais each." Apparently it's a new low-cost company. Now, if you remember, I said I'm fond of nice things when I travel. It includes the plane. Sure, usually we just spend 1 to 3 hours in the plane, so it's okay if it's not super spacious and comfy, but we always travel by the country's best company, LATAM. The plane on the inside looked like a can of corn. There was no finishing, just cheap-looking metal everywhere. The seat was rough and the fabric seemed old and dirty. And don't even get me started about the smell. It was like the only plate in their menu was old rancid cheese. Well, it's not ideal, but Miguel was a Mr. Brightside type of guy when it came to traveling. He came from a lower class background, so he was clearly very thankful for this opportunity of going to Europe. I tried not to ruin the mood even more than the plane already did, but I knew I looked anxious. "I'll just try to get some sleep," I replied, with a weak smile. I was known for being a heavy plane sleeper. I have slept through turbulences. I have slept during takeoff, landing, and even middle sentence. But obviously, it wouldn't be so easy. I chuckled to myself when the head stewardess started demonstrating the safety procedures in logo. I was used to planes where everyone has their own screen and there's some institutional video about floating seats, oxygen masks and stuff. My seat was in the second row and I was in the corridor, so she noticed me and directed me a nasty look. Great. Now I have to live through 10 hours of awkwardness. The stewardesses were all plain-looking white females, with brown eyes, brown hair in a bun and too much makeup. They were polite in a very cold way, and had kind of a mean look on their faces, but it could be due to their eyebrow design, which was the same in all of them. When the plane finally took off, I couldn't believe how noisy and unsteady it was. The whole experience was like being in a bus that's going at high speed in a bumpy road. The plane had no entertainment, no Wi-Fi, and sleeping was nearly impossible, but I didn't want to talk and ruin the mood, so I just let my head hang to the side and started thinking of every possible thought in the universe. I must have actually dozed off at some point. When I woke up, the plane was in semi-darkness. I half opened my eyes, letting them adjust to the lighting, and saw hawk-like claws on the floor. Walking. They were big and tall and I didn't dare moving my gaze to take a better look. I could see just one of the bird legs. Maybe I should feel terrified, but my mind dismissed it. I felt a vague fear, like something bad was happening at the distance and I could only see silhouettes from where I stood. I assumed I was still dreaming and closed my eyes again. I didn't eat or drink anything in the plane, besides the water in my own bottle. My stomach was acting up, the food smelled awful, and plane food is usually expensive. When I woke up again, my fiancé was drinking a cocktail in a glass that looked greasy. "Hey babe," when he noticed I was awake, his face was bright again. "Want me to order something for you to eat or drink?" "It's for free." "No, sweetie, I'm fine," I replied in a quiet voice, trying not to show how displeased I was. "My gastritis is really bad today, you poor thing," he replied in an amorous voice, leaning to kiss my forehead. "Don't worry, everything will get better once we land. You're gonna love Lisbon." When we arrived at the airport, my anxiety just worsened. Everything was dull, greyish and poorly lit. Besides us and our plane companions, everyone seemed lagged. Their movements were unnaturally slow. I knew Lisbon was famous for its pretty architecture, and beautiful buildings were basically the reason I was there, but I have seen none on our way to the hotel. Everything honestly looked like a slum, but grey and pale instead of colourful. We were on a cab for 40 minutes and in this time we saw nearly nobody in the streets. Usually airports are outside the city, babe. "I know you think everything is ugly here, but it will get better," Miguel told me, his excitement unwavering. We checked in our hotel. It was the only normal building I had seen so far. The clerk looked a little like the stewardesses. I figured women that deal with tourists probably have this standard look. It should be just the similar makeup, but this fact made me even more anxious anyway. We went to our room, me entering first. It was almost exactly like our room at home. The white wardrobe was the same. The queen-size bed was like ours in everything, except that it had an ugly headboard. It even had sheets and blankets with the same patterns we had. There was a vanity with the same kind of stool I had at home. I frowned, but then started laughing. Baby, that's funny. Funny and sweet. You found a room that's exactly like ours, so I don't get so anxious being away from home. When I turned to Miguel behind me, however, he was a bit pale, and totally unamused. That's not the room I booked. What? That's not the room I booked. The photos I've seen were totally different. I'll call the reception and tell them they're mistaken. He tried calling for 5 minutes or so, but no one answered. Well, let's leave our stuff here and go downstairs, talk to them. But no one was at the reception. There was no bellboy, no clerk, no one in the halls or the entrance or the counter. Let's just solve this later, Miguel said, his confidence finally shaken. Let's enjoy the end of our afternoon. But we didn't. Everywhere we went, people had dead eyes and weird movements. Well, nearly everyone. Some were clearly afraid, looking at every face with wide eyes that seemed to be on the verge of madness. We stopped for some afternoon tea. We had seen a place in TripAdvisor we wanted to go, but couldn't find it, even though it was close to our hotel. There was no Wi-Fi and the SIM cards we bought didn't work, so we couldn't use Google Maps. I was hungry, having not eaten in the plane, so we decided to enter a random cafe. The food was awful. The waiters took our order and brought us something entirely unrelated. I wanted croissants and ended up with some weird, bulky, greenish bread. It arrived at the table first, and stank so bad. I couldn't bring myself to eat. I didn't care if it was some local exotic cuisine. Miguel ordered charcuterie, but what the waiter brought makes me sick to this day. It was raw, rotten meat. Under it, there was something that alarmingly seemed like a tuft of human hair. Story 4, Milwaukee, Wisconsin reports. I'm a writer, and sometimes I find things while I research. I was lurking around in a library in Billings, Montana, and well, I found these reports. Call logs. I'm not sure what you'd call these. I think I'm going to stay out of the woods from now on. The following is a full transcript of the 911 calls pertaining to events that took place between the days of the 23rd of April 1998 and the 5th of March 1998 within the small town of Milwaukee, Montana. During this time period, over 68 911 calls in relation to the strange occurrences near the surrounding forests. The following has been censored to protect the victim's privacy. To this day, the case of what exactly happened during the 12 days remains unsolved and is one of the least known large-scale disappearances in U.S. history. The 23rd of April 1998 to 5:55 p.m. Dispatch, hello, 911 what's your emergency? Resident, there's a thing outside my house, it's slamming on my door. Dispatch, where are you? What's the address, ma'am? Resident, I'm at, redacted, please send someone out here, it keeps, trying to get in and I'm hiding under my bed right now in the basement but I can hear it upstairs. Dispatch, did you know what this person looks like? Could you give me a description? Resident, I don't know what it looks like, it's just, so bright it hurts. Please send someone, I'm scared. Dispatch, is the person inside? Are you home alone? Resident, no, they're at my front door just slamming it over and over and over. Dispatch, ma'am, are you home alone? Do you have anyone else there? Resident, I live alone, it's just me. Please hurry, it's so loud, so bright. Dispatch, it's gonna be alright ma'am, stay where you are, the police are on their way. Resident, please. The caller then hung up, and could not be contacted after this. When dispatch arrived, there was no one inside the house or any evidence of a break-in. Edit, upon demolition of the house in 2002, it was discovered that there was a whole human body encased in the concrete floor of the basement, which was over 8 foot deep. The body was found laying in the fetal position, with no signs of physical damage other than the concrete itself. How the body got into the concrete is unknown, and the blueprints for the house specify that the basement floor was originally 2 feet deep. The deed for the house was owned by a man 4 states over, and there are no local missing persons cases that match up with the body. The 24th of April 1998 to 2:14 a.m. Dispatch, hello, 911, what is your emergency? Resident, hi, I'd like to report a break-in. Someone just threw a rock into my window downstairs and I don't think they're gone. It's so bright down there I think they've got floodlights. I've got my .12 gauge but I also have my kids in here and I don't want to scare them. Dispatch, there are people in your house right now. Where's your location? Resident, yes ma'am, 2 of them. I'm at 4970 Oak Street. I got my kids locked in my room with me but, they're scared. Dispatch, help is on the way. How old are your children? Resident, 5 and 9, both girls. I think they're coming up the stairs now. Dispatch, the police are en route, stay calm. Try and keep quiet, and make sure your girls are in a safe place. Resident, they're trying the door now. Knocking on it, not opening or turning the knob. I don't think they're, trying to open it. God, they're shining that thing right under the door. Dispatch, are they saying anything, sir? Resident, no, they're just knocking. Both of them one at a time. One sounds smaller. What do I do? Fuck, it's so bright, it's like the sun. Dispatch, try to stay calm, sir. The police are nearly there. Resident, one of the caller's daughters begins screaming. What's wrong? Honey. Dispatch, sir, is everyone okay? Resident, my kid she's just screaming. I can't see anything, my eyes hurt so. Dispatch, sir, please remain calm, the police are nearly there. Is she hurt? Sir? The caller then hung up, and was found deceased with his 2 daughters at his side. There were no signs of a breaking and entering, nor were there any evidence of locks being picked. There still is, however, a debate within Milwaukee on how exactly the family died when found. Each one of them was individually mummified in a manner consistent with that of a peat bog mummy. The 25th of April 1998 to 8:25 p.m. Dispatch, 911, what's your emergency? Resident, hi, I'd like to ask for a wellness check on one of my relatives. Dispatch, when was the last time you heard from this person? Can you give me the address please? Resident, about 6 months ago. He's my father-in-law, and he's at the Basket Elm Old Folks Home, up on Briar Road. Dispatch, do you think this is funny? Resident, what? I haven't been able to contact the home. Dispatch, I'm getting very tired of this prank. Tell whoever set you up for these shenanigans that you could get serious time for clogging up emergency numbers. Resident, what are you talking about? This isn't a prank, my father-in-law is missing, it's serious. Dispatch, sure it is. What kind of trick are you even pulling here? Resident, what are you talking about? Can I speak to your manager? I just need to make sure he's okay. Dispatch, nice try, punk. Call this number one more time and I'm going to press charges. Dispatch then hung up, in the wake of no less than 8 other calls demanding the same wellness check to the same location. A multitude of families have come out over the years, stating that there were family members in that home with the paperwork to prove it. A small fortune of bank statements, paperwork, licenses, and the like have been confirmed as authentic to the home, although the payments continue up to the week before demolition. Residents in the town, however, have another story. There weren't any elderly in the town at all. The locations of these 50-plus geriatrics is to this day unknown, and with very little in the way of shelter, food, and water in the local forests, it is likely that the Alzheimer-riddled patients have succumbed to nature. Private investigations have recovered little in the way of physical evidence, although families from Milwaukee that were on vacation during the incident do confirm that there were residents in the now abandoned nursing home. These individuals either cannot place the names or locations of any staff or residents, or refuse to comment. The 27th of April 1998 to 1:34 1:46 halves:05/. Dispatch, 911, what's your emergency? Resident, I'd like to file a noise complaint. I think there's someone out in the woods behind my house screaming up a storm, sounds like a murder. These fucking kids, I'll tell you what. Dispatch, 911, what's your emergency? Resident, yeah, there's a mountain lion or something out in my yard. It keeps screaming at me and well, I've got to go to work soon. It's too grassy to tell for sure, but whatever it is, it sounds like it's right outside my yard. Dispatch, hello, 911, what's your emergency? Resident, my son's he's been attacked by a bear, I think. Dispatch, Mom, where is your location? Is he awake? Resident, I'm at, redacted. He keeps moving, but I don't think he's alive. Dispatch, Mom, I'm going to need you to answer a few questions. Resident, he's not alive, but he keeps jerking around. He's being pulled around from the insides. God, my baby. Dispatch, Mom, we have an ambulance on the way, please just answer these questions. What exactly happened? Resident, oh God, Jeremy, it was so loud and he just stepped outside off the porch and oh God, I found him pulling back through the doggy door and God, oh God, he's still moving, but he's not right, please. All of these accounts were made within 30 minutes and 15 miles of one another, and are suspected to be interconnected. The sounds in the forest were concluded to be from the same general area, and the screaming is described almost identically in the individual survivor interviews. As for the young man who was maimed on his porch, there is no conclusive explanation. Once the EMTs arrived, he had ceased movement completely, however there was substantial evidence that the internal organs did become mobile. He was deemed to have been brain dead since before leaving the house, and the mystery of what exactly was outside that door will most likely never be solved. His mother is currently being treated for catatonic schizophrenia and PTSD likely resulting from the incident and refuses to comment. The final call pertaining to the unusual happenings in Milwaukee was on the 5th of March 1998, and stated the following. Dispatch, 911, what is your emergency? Resident, this is automated warning. Do not hang up. Dispatch, what? Hello? Resident, angels have come. Dispatch, is this another one of goddamn pranks? Listen. Resident, be not afraid. The Lord has woken and will soon arise. Be not afraid. Dispatch, I told you. Resident, this is automated warning. The kingdom of heaven has broken open. Be not afraid. Keep away from windows. Do not make eye contact. Be not afraid. Dispatch, if you don't stop right now I will. Resident, the dead will rise. Be not afraid. Angels have come. The phone line then went dead, and was later revealed to be cut in multiple places. There will likely never be a complete explanation for what was that occurred in the small, tight-knit community of Milwaukee, Montana. Multiple theories have sprouted over the years, ranging from alien interference, CIA MK-Ultra-style experiments, mass hysteria, all the way to cult activity, but none can be proven as fact. Story 5, A Vampire Tale from My Great-Aunt. Alright, quick background on my family history. A couple generations ago my family on my mom's side moved to the States from Albania, which I don't know about now, but was pretty superstitious around the time. The town my great-aunt lived in around the time in particular was probably more superstitious than most others. She was a little girl at the time and her family was talking about moving to the States to get away from a town curse. There was reports of a man who was killed about 20 years prior during the war who came back draining people of their lives. The government was trying their best to calm the people and guarded the grave from would-be hunters. But eventually things changed after events plagued my great-aunt. She started to feel sick, everyone thought she caught the flu and was taken to the doctors, but the doctors told her that she seemed fine and that she may just need some rest. So she would lay down and her mother would do everything she could to take care of her. She got scared as weeks went by and she got sicker, so she brought in a priest and they would pray over her in hopes that God would heal her. But the priest eventually felt too uncomfortable being in the house. He told her how he could feel evil in the house. He tried cleansing the house of evil spirits and left. The priest went missing for a week after that. One day my great-aunt said she woke up unable to breathe, and she looked at the specter who haunted her. It was a man who looked like death. He was on her bed draining her slowly, She screamed for her mother and began screaming the name of Jesus Christ, and the monster flew out of the window. Her mother checked on her and was deciding on whether or not if her daughter was telling the truth. A week went by and they found the priest inside his home, dead. His death was fate. They said he was spooked by something to the point his heart gave out. They held a service for the man and my great-aunt and her family attended. And there was a new change of events happening in the town. The guards were no longer around the grave and people noticed. Whispers went around town and a plan was made. As the new priest was getting prepared and settled in, a mob checked the gravesite. They opened up the grave and saw a man who looked as if he passed only days ago. His hair was growing some and looked groomed, his mouth was drenched in blood, and his nails have grown into claws. They decided to set a trap. My great-aunt was given a coin that was wrapped up. She did not see her nightly visitor, but she could smell smoke and walked to the source. She saw her church burning. On the door was a bone cross. She could hear screams from inside the building. It was so inhuman. The town people guided her home as the church burned down. For protective measure, the town people went back to the grave and checked on the body in the grave. It was gone. Now personally I don't know what fully happened. I think an animal could have taken the body and the town could have killed a man trapped in the church out of paranoia. But that wouldn't explain why my great-aunt started to get better shortly after the vampire was killed. She gave me the very same coin she was given as a kid and told me to keep it. She told me I may need it myself soon. She's still in the hospital, she is dying, and honestly I'm not sure how much time I have left to spend with her, but I am enjoying all these stories she is telling me. Story 6, I can see the future, but I can't change it. It started when I was young. They come as flashing premonitions, images, or sometimes in dreams. I don't know how or why I get these, but I know that they always come to pass, and I can't do anything to stop them from happening. The earliest I can remember was when I was maybe 7. I had dreams that I was in the Navy. More than that, I dreamt that I was doing things that were confidential and operating secret systems that weren't known outside of the military. Keep in mind, I was a young boy, and these never really meant much to me. Before I continue, I just want to explain more about this. Sometimes my mind trails off when I'm alone, and I see images. These images often show a process happening, same for dreams. But dreams tend to be more detailed. I've come to believe that these dreams/images reveal to me something that will happen in my future. The only thing is, I never know when, where or how they happen, but they happen. Think déjà vu. One example that explains this. I was 13, I saw an image of someone on a pull-up bar, and the next was one of a fractured wrist. A few months later, in front of my eyes, I see my friend attempt to do a pull-up on the school's pull-up bar. But he fails to do so, suddenly falls and sits there. We laugh at first, thinking he slipped up and was pretending to be hurt, as his back was facing us. We come around and we see him, pale as a ghost. I glance down, and I see him cradling his right arm. His wrist, it was fractured. At that very moment, the image I saw months ago hits me. Exactly the same, copy for copy. His wrist, extended to a length abnormal. A little bent to the side, motionless. The images came to pass. Back to the story of the most damning evidence of this thing I have. Fast forward 11 years. Military service is compulsory in my country, so I had to enlist as a soldier and serve my country for 2 years. After completing my basic training, I was waiting to get posted to a vocation. You can guess. But I was posted to the Navy, and this was randomly assigned. I did not have a choice in where I would go for my vocation. This caused me to reminisce back to the dream I had, that showed me in a Navy uniform, and because this wasn't the first time I saw images/dreams that had come to pass, I knew that this was predestined. I got assigned a job that I'd never heard of, and I doubt many have heard of it either. This job involved me heading into a secret zone on my base, in order to conduct my ops. Then came that fateful day. I was about 5 months into this new job. I was happy, and finally familiar with my ops. I'm sitting on watch, in front of 4 computer screens with the confidential system on them. I execute the programs and system that I knew like the back of my hand, yet today, I changed the way I did it. Suddenly, the system shuts down. My superior, sitting behind me, springs up. He comes to my side, watches me as I reset the system on the screens. Everything's back to normal. I look back, heaving a sigh of relief. My fellow men were sitting in office chairs, relaxed yet alert, looking on at what just happened. 5 of them arranged in an oval manner. 2 of them facing me, 3 of them looking at me with necks turned, backs facing me. I turn back to the computer screens. Soon enough, my superior sits back down. But in the process, he spills the cup of coffee he prepared for himself. He cusses. I swivel back, alarmed, accessing the situation, almost ready to help him. Out of nowhere, I stopped moving. This sudden huge wave of déjà vu hits me. It came to my realization that everything that had just happened in the past minute or so, was exactly, image for image, played out in the dream I had so many years ago. I cannot stress more that it was exactly the same, uncanny in resemblance. The way I sat, the way I crashed the system, the way I set it back up, the shape in which my mates were sitting, the number of them facing me, whether they had their backs turned, the side of me that my superior looms in to access the system shut down. It was in the dream. This astonished me. For I had not felt this déjà vu feeling for almost 5 years, and it just crashed over me and left me hapless. It just confirmed that I was never ever wrong about this power I had, albeit useless, as I could never change the outcome, but I knew the details. However, this isn't the weird part. Just a week ago, I had a dream. I dreamt that I saw a murder. I dreamt that I was on a cold street, looking deep into a house that had yellow lights on, large windows and a small garden. I dreamt that I saw a silhouette of a man plunging a knife deep into the heart of a woman while I stood there, witnessing. I dreamt that the silhouette instinctively turned and looked at my direction. I dreamt that the silhouette suddenly disappeared. I dreamt that the main door swung wide open. I dreamt the man charged towards me. I dreamt that he had a knife. I dreamt that I died. And I woke up. I thought it was just a bad dream, so I shrugged it off. I drove into town, and decided to use a road in the suburbs so I could avoid early morning traffic. It was a peaceful drive. But then, I saw it. I saw the house in my dream. Story 7, Should I be worried? Guys, I just had a really weird thing happen to me today. And I'm not sure how I feel about it. So, first thing you should know is that I have a job, but it's not a good one. It's a shitty fast food job, and it pays a shitty amount per hour, and I can just barely get by. Just barely make rent. But I mean, welcome to life and adulthood, right? This is the kind of thing everyone deals with, and suck it up and move on is just kinda everyone's motto, right? At least I have a job, and an apartment, even if it's tiny and crappy, and the AC is almost always broken, and the bed is creaky, and the wallpaper's peeling, and the water's never warm, and well, you get the point. But it's a roof over my head. But lately I've been well, you know. Everyone gets to where they want better for themselves, right? Where they get listless because it feels like you're just trapped in this rut, and you're going to die a pathetic nobody, trapped in a leaky apartment with neighbors having the sex you never get upstairs. It gets to you, right? So I was having one of those days. The shitty ones where all I wanted to do was get absolutely shit-faced and feel sorry for myself. My date had ditched me the night before, the neighbors were at it again, and it stung even worse now that it was being fucking rubbed in that they got some and I didn't, and my job had just slashed my fucking hours so I was making even less, and I was seriously considering having to pick up a second fucking job. What social life? And on top of all that bullshit, my arsehole landlord had taken to hand delivering his bills, because some craplord tenants had been lying about never getting theirs and shit, and trying to scam him. I actually felt bad for the guy, even if he was a dick. No one deserves little asshole scam artists trying to pull a fast one, not even him, so he'd shown up with the damn thing in his hand and I could see him squinting past me, trying to judge the state of my apartment and see if he'd find any excuse to keep his fucking deposit. I slammed the door on his foot. Oops. I'd said, over his swearing and snarling, hoping I sounded at least a little honest. That was like 6 hours ago. I've been sitting in my living room ever since, my bedroom door closed. I have spare sheets and blankets and a pillow from the closet out here with me, because I don't think I want to go back in there. Not just yet anyway. Because guys, you have to understand, I'd been having a really crappy week. So I'd gone into my bedroom and just gone to town, torn that damn rent reminder up into tiny pieces, crumpled them up, stomped on them, and then kicked the whole damn shebang under my bed. I didn't need a fucking reminder. Trust me, old man, I know I owe rent. The thing is, guys, a few minutes later I heard a weird noise. And when I looked back, the bundle of what used to be my landlord's notice came sliding back out, attached to a hand. It was not a human hand. It was huge, with 3 long fingers, tipped with these wicked needle claws. Jet black, with wrinkly skin, almost scaly. And along with my notice, it also pushed out a wad of cash. So now, here I am, huddled in my living room. I peeked in there earlier, and the money and paper is still there, but the hand is gone, retreated back under the bed, I guess. I don't know what the fuck to do, or feel. I mean, after all, at least he helps with rent. Better than some room is, right? Story 8, Bloodlust. Everyone loves stories of superheroes and warriors. Everyone loves a good fantasy about someone with great power. You see them and imagine what you would do with such power. Save someone, save everyone. Imagine being stronger than a weightlifter, running faster than a car, and being a living weapon capable of great things, or terrible things. Imagine sitting inside your own body, and watching yourself tearing people apart and rummaging through their insides. Everyone wants power, but I'm here to warn you, no, beg you not to go looking for it. I used to have a normal life. I went to school every day. Hated it, of course. I just kept my hood up and both earbuds in, cranking up the volume to drown out the ignorant ramblings of my classmates. If it wasn't already obvious, I've always isolated myself from everyone. At least then it was a choice. Anyway, I always took the same path through the woods. I'd walked it every day since freshman year. After nearly 4 years of walking from school to home on this trail, I'd had time to memorize those woods pretty well, and I'd never once crossed paths with anyone. That made that night even more weird now that I look back. It was mid-fall. All the leaves were falling off the trees, and had littered every inch of the forest floor. Every footstep met with a satisfying crunch. The air was brisk, and the sunset slowly dimmed the sky. Just like any other night, I strode through the woods with my hood up, and my hands on my pockets. I had my earphones in, blasting my playlist. That was a bad idea. I couldn't hear my own footsteps, let alone those creeping up behind me. If ever, a day in my life, I could have wished my phone was dead, or even if I had to stay late at school with detention, it would have been that night. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case. That night everything was normal. Terribly, horribly, normal. Having never heard those footsteps, I was obviously oblivious to the fact that anyone was coming up behind me. That was until I felt 2 inhumanly strong hands clamp down like vice grips on either shoulder. The pain would have brought me to my knees had the adrenaline not sent me into overdrive. I felt a cold shock of fear electrocute my whole body. I spun around as fast as 2 could move, ready to fight for my life. James. I uttered in a shaken breath. He was a kid from my 4th-hour history class. What the fuck are you doing? At first I was pissed. I mean, who just walks up behind someone like that, and grabs them? Especially so damn hard. That anger faded in a flash as I realized he was clearly in pain. His whole body was sickly pale, eyes red, and so empty. He looked like he was overdosing on some kind of drug. I tried my best to calm him down. His breathing was so frantic, and I could see a look of pure terror on his face. He didn't want to die. James, are you okay? Obviously stupid question, I know that now, but I was holding some kid I barely knew while he was dying of a drug overdose. I didn't know what else to say. All I knew was that he needed help, fast. After a hell of a fight, with him lashing and shaking, I finally managed to lay him still on a small pile of wild leaves. I turned to run and get help. It was that moment, that one fucking moment, that I died. He grabbed my shoulder, somehow impaling my skin, ripping through my jacket. I screamed and tried to rip my arm from his grasp. How the hell was he so strong? It had to be whatever drug he took that was causing him to overdose. Whatever the case, I couldn't get him to let go. All he did was stare at me. His eyes bloodshot, and full of terror. His mouth slowly fluttered open, as he tried, with all his mortal strength, to produce words. All he managed to get out were three. "Don't let me." Then his words were ripped from him as he fought desperately for another breath. At this point he collapsed, with his eyes and mouth open. He finally released that inhuman grip, and despite the immense pain, I still had to find help. I sprinted through the woods, the sun almost completely gone at this point, leaving the full moon to light the path ahead. I ran faster than I had ever before in my life. He could be dead by now. By the time I got out of the woods, it had only been a few minutes, but it seemed like hours. I burst out of the clearing and straight to the first house I saw. My blood burned like battery acid. I assume this was from the fear and adrenaline. I beat on the door until finally I was greeted by an old man in his boxers clutching a shotgun. Yeah, small town. Anyway, I tried to get out as much information as I could. James was dying, and he needed an ambulance. In those moments waiting for the ambulance to arrive, I paced the old man's yard. Over the throb in my arm I pondered those words. "Don't let me." Don't let me what? I assumed he meant don't let me die. I was wrong. Once the paramedics finally arrived, I led them back down the path into the forest, and back to the spot I had left James. We arrived only to find a sunken pile of leaves, and a pile of torn clothing. I tried to explain what I could to the paramedics. The police came, and sent out a search party. The paramedics patched up my arm, cleaning it, shaking their heads at the possibility that just a hand could puncture skin like that. Once I calmed down, I gave the police details, and one gave me a ride home. After that, my life passed on as normal for close to a month. My shoulder healed, and no one ever saw James again. It was late November now, and snow had fallen over my town. The night in the woods had left only a few small scars, but the incident taught me to enjoy life a little. For once I ate dinner with my family. It was actually nice. My parents, surprised by my presence, listened in as my little sister bragged to my little brothers about how much better girls were than boys. My parents both chuckled at her innocence. The whole night was nice, normal even. I wish I knew then, that would be my last night with them. I would spent some time with my siblings, and told my parents I loved them. I woke the next morning, and I immediately knew something was off. All day I had been inexplicably hostile. Every simple thing just set me off. I also had this hunger, it was so strong it made it hard to even think. I even bought a second lunch, tried for a third. A teacher came up to me, trying to cut me off. My hunger though, it was so deep in my stomach, it made my home body hurt. I needed to eat. I would do anything to make it go away. When Mr. Swanson, that fat cow of a man, stepped in front of me, a primal rage took over, and I plowed right over him, then kept going. I needed to eat, and nothing else mattered more. As the hunger built I felt stronger, the hunger driving me like a starving dog. Before I realized, I myself, was tackled to the ground. You fought every step of the way, landing a few solid blows before I realized what I was doing. I tried to control myself and relaxed, allowing myself to go down. Goes without saying, but I got detention that night. Fucking lucky I didn't get arrested, so I took it. I sat there, head on the desk, thinking about what happened earlier that day. How, and why did I do that? I had never felt such hunger in all my life. I couldn't think, and nothing else mattered beyond satisfying that hunger. I had no control. Night had fallen when I finally left the school. The light of the full moon once again shone down on my familiar path home, just as it did the night James disappeared. As I walked, I slowly felt a kind of anger build in the pit of my stomach. It grew until I felt adrenaline pulse like fire throughout my body with every heartbeat. Then, just as before, it was accompanied by a deep, primitive hunger. It grew, numbing my mind. God, I was just so hungry, and just angry. My whole body was in a pain I can't even try to describe to you here. I collapsed as my stomach forced dry heaves. I wrenched in hunger pains that made it impossible to move. I felt my mind slip back as the hunger and rage took control. At first I fought it, but I needed to survive, and somehow I knew that if I just gave in, this beast inside me would just make this all stop. Pain shot through me as I felt my bones break and grow. My heart beat deep in my chest, beat with a power like a war drum. As I lay there writhing, my skin felt like fire, as a thick, white fur burst from it and covered every inch of my body. I saw my fingernails grow into black sharp claws, rooted at the end of every finger. Then, it all just stopped. I rose to my feet, several feet taller than I remember being. My hot breath rolled out into the cold winter air. Even though I clearly was no longer human, it felt, somehow right. This was what I needed to be. I took off through the forest, my powerful arms and legs kicking up snow with every powerful beat. I ran so fast jet trees flew past my in a blur. I would occasionally grab a tree, my claws leaving behind nothing more than a cloud of splinters and bark. At first, I didn't know where I was running to. At first I didn't care. I was the beast of unimaginable strength and power I always dreamed about. Then I realized, and my heart ran cold. I was going to the same place I always did when I walked this forest. I was going home. I tried to tell myself to stop, to go anywhere else. That was when I learned, I had no control. It was as if I was riding backseat in my own body. I looked through my own eyes, but something else was in control. That hunger, that beast inside had taken over, leaving me to watch the events that took place next. I tried with all my willpower to make it stop, to go eat a fucking deer or something else. Anything else. This was my fault. I had given in, I had let it take control. All I wanted was to make the hunger stop. If I knew what I would do next, I would have been willing to endure pain forever. I never would have let it take over. It was too late. I got to watch from somewhere deep inside my own body. I watched as I tore through my own front door, leaving splinters of wood, using a similar amount of force as that of punching through a sheet of tissue paper. I had to watch as I tore out the throat of my father, his lifeblood running down my fur-covered chest. I got to see my mother for the last time, as she ran down the stairs, screaming at the sight of my father's decapitated head rolling across the table. His lifeless body was still gripped in my powerful clutches. I saw myself rip into her insides. Blood ran from her mouth as she tried desperately to fight, doing anything to stop me. As I rummaged through her intestines, she was alive, trying to say something, but her words were drowned as her gurgled her own blood. I wish I could say at that moment I was scared, or even regretful. I wish I could say I wanted to stop. Somehow, I enjoyed it. I do, however, wish I could say I stopped with her. I watched from within as I moved upstairs and killed the rest of my family. Each one of my little siblings, trying to fight, to live another day. I grew stronger as my white fur was stained red, as body parts, no longer identifiable, littered both stories of my childhood home. I faded in and out of consciousness as my beast feasted on their meat. It ate until that terrible hunger finally was quenched. In a decision that both me and my beast agreed on, I ran back toward the forest. I outran all the cars chasing me. Their blue and red lights following me, sending bullets into my body, doing nothing to slow me down. I just ran faster, until I no longer knew where I was. The sirens had faded into the distance. There was no sign of humanity deep in the trees aside from the arm of one police officer I ripped off and was carrying between my teeth. His hand with a death grip on his pistol. I slowed down, sank to my knees, and faded into the darkness. Remember when I told you I died that night? I wasn't lying. That night my life really was over, I just didn't know it yet. I knew now was James was trying to tell me. It wasn't don't let me die, but rather don't let me turn. He knew what he was, and what he would do. It's happened before. That's why I have made my decision. I kneel here in the snow, surrounded by the blood of my family, that the night before had clung to my fur. I feel the cold steel of the officer's pistol under my chin. I feel some fear, but nothing compared to the fear of what I may become again. I cannot let that beast come back, and I know he will. I know that if that hunger returns, no matter how hard I try to fight it, I will give in. I cannot allow myself to become that killer. Everyone wants power, until they have it, and can't control it. Well, I have power. At this moment I have control of my own fate. I close my eyes, and take in the world around me. I enjoy one last, nice deep breath. As I exhale, I gently squeeze the trigger. This is the only cure my bloodlust. Story 9, my apartment kidnapped me last night and I need to get out of my lease. Text me if you're interested in subletting. I rent an apartment in Common Grove, a suburb between two major US cities. A company I won't name here, took me on as an analyst, so I found this place within walking distance and moved in. Last night the apartment kidnapped me, and yes, you read that right. It's a lovely place and I'm sure it's a good fit for someone, just not me. So last night I got home from work to what I thought at first to be a practical joke. Someone replaced my clock with a black cat clock. The eyes and tail twitched in time with each second. I knew this clock and I hated it. It came from my grandmother's house. The hair on the back of my neck stood upright. My brother knew how I felt about this clock. I assumed he was behind this. I texted him, "Ha ha, very funny, Wade." A few seconds later, swoosh. "No idea what you're talking about?" Tap. Tap. "You're such an asshole." Swoosh. Macron __/ Macron. Don't get me wrong, this place is really comfortable when it's not trying to warp your mind. The living room is bigger than in some places. I flopped down on the couch and started a movie. Halfway through the opening, the screen went dark. White noise crackled low like cooking bacon crackling in a pan, and then a voice. Duet. T. Chappie. I sat straight up. I must have dozed. I dismissed it as a hypnagogic spasm and tried to restart the movie. No dice. Duet. T. Chappie. Maybe it was code. I entered the words into search. Your search did not produce any results. Nope. I was over it. I decided to go to bed. I walked down the hall toward my room and a picture caught my eye, a picture of my great-grandfather straight out of my childhood fears. He stared back from behind piercing blue eyes. He looked like Rasputin. It never failed to give me the willies. It loomed next to the bathroom in my mother's house most of my childhood. Tap. I see what you did there. I snapped a pic and sent. I went to my room and climbed into bed. The feeling of someone watching me intensified. I felt a stare on my back even through the mattress. 15 minutes passed, still no reply. I laid in the dark and thought about my revenge. Good one, Wade. Good one, ding. Rang out from my phone, followed by several more. I jumped. Dude. I'm at Mom's. Call me. He couldn't be at Mom's. She lived halfway across the country. Still haven't heard from you. Mom's worried. Answer the damn phone. The last text came directly from Mom. I looked at the screen. 6 missed calls and 2 new voicemails. How did I miss 6 calls? 2 were from Wade, the rest were from her. I played the first message. Chance, we think you should leave the house and go to the police. Something's not right. We really want, make sure you're okay. That picture shouldn't be there. I'm looking at it right now. You know, if this is your idea of a... It cut off. She sounded pretty upset. I listened to it 2 more times. Ding. Wade sent a photo. It was the portrait of great-grandpa next to Mom's bathroom. Same picture, same frame. How could it be there and here? I immediately tried to ring them back, but my phone kept dropping each call. I had to double-check the picture. I threw off the sheets and crept toward the door. I could hear people talking. I opened it a crack and peeked out. You know those clickbait headlines where they say something like, "This mangy mutt led them into the woods." Nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. You know the ones. Well, I had a clickbait moment. A 70s era room, complete with black, shag carpeting, replaced my hallway. In the center, stood 4 women behind podiums. Each wore a flight attendant's uniform. Their clothes were nearly identical except in color: white, green, black and blue. I shut the door and put weight against it with my back. I tried to think. I know. The window. I'll go out the window. I slid it open and found only darkness outside, pure black empty space. I reached out my hand and pulled it straight back. It felt like an icebox. I slid the window closed and looked toward the door. I walked back over and tried to make sense of it. I glanced down. 3 monogrammed arrows appeared in the carpet, pointing at the door. WTF. I crouched down and pulled the knob toward me, slowly. Another monogram, this time an uppercase yellow letter M, sunk into the shag outside my room. When I gathered the courage to step forward, my bedroom door closed behind me with a slam. Anxiety overthrew me. I tried to get back in, but it was no use. The knob would not budge. On the door hung a series of numbers, 0630. I turned to face the room. On closer inspection, it was divided by 4 different colors of carpet: green, white, black and blue. The host of the section where I stood wore a black naval blouse, a wide red belt and a mustard yellow skirt. Her pillbox hat combined all 3 colors. Above the host, hung a monitor broadcasting a test pattern. The host cleared her throat. Numavietsenemi, beat Gayazuternals extra null. The words flashed on the screen as she spoke. I snapped a picture. A woman stood up, ran to the podium and threw herself on her knees. Beat, Darfik Nachhaus again? She cried. Beat? The woman was pleading. Her eyes swelled with tears. Beat? She begged in a slow, hoarse whisper. The host smiled and pressed a button. The screen flashed red. 2 large men in orderly uniforms seized the woman and escorted her to door 0630. She struggled and cried, "Beat," several times. Before they could get her through the door, she broke free. She made it 3 steps before Orderly 1 pulled her back like a rag doll and snapped her neck. Orderly 2 picked up her legs and they both carried her body through door 0630. The word beat rang in my ears. I knew what it meant. It meant please. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Orderly 1. You have no pants, he said in a thick English accent. English. I blurted. You speak English. Where am I? What is this? None of that matters. Come with me. He led me to a door and pushed me through, hard. Wherever they dumped me, it was pitch black. I switched on my phone. I was in my kitchen. I found a switch, flipped it on and went to the living room. The first thing I noticed, the area had only 1 door, next to the couch. Black arrows told me that this was the way, the only way out. Next I saw a clean, pressed, grey, 3-piece suit draped over my recliner. A matching fedora perched on top. At the base, sat a pair of black, patent leather shoes. I sat down on the couch and opened up my phone. No service. I had a strong Wi-Fi signal, though. I tapped on Google Translate and entered the text from the picture. Since Beat is German, I opted to translate from that. Number 14 ME, please proceed to door 0630. That gave me little to go on. I searched for hours and learned nothing. Only one choice remained. I threw on the suit and shoes and stood in front of the door. I knocked, this time just to see what would happen. In a moment, Orderly 1 greeted me. He looked me up and down for a moment and said, "Acceptable." He led me to the podium and translated as the host processed me. She assigned me designation 31WA and assured my safe return home once I completed the test. Orderly 1 handed me 2 playing cards and pointed to the benches along the wall. I sat next to a fretful child no more than 14. "What is this place?" I asked her. "You speak English?" she said, keeping her eyes straight forward. Her hands were trembling. Well, yes, I returned. I think it's some kind of puzzle. You're the first subject I've seen in months who speaks English. She glanced quickly around. Do you have a phone? I do, but it's worthless. I can only look things up. I can't communicate to the outside world. Remember this number. She fired off 10 digits, which I did my best to memorize. Tell my parents that I love them and I'm trying to come home. A single tear fell down her cheek. Okay, I'll do my best. What kind of puzzle? I pressed. I don't know. The numbers mean something. I've been home more times than I can count, but it's never the same. It's either the wrong past or the right future. The monitor in our section flickered on. The host cleared her throat. Numaviert sein me, beat gayers uternals extra null. I glanced at the young girl. Her face was wet with tears. Is that you? Yes, she whispered. I've been here for 7 years. My name is Angela. Please, tell my mom and dad I love them and I'll be home soon. Numaviert sein me, beat gayers uternals extra null. The monitor above the host was now translating to English. Number 14 me, please proceed to door 0630. I stopped asking, where was I, and started asking, when was I? I folded my hands on my lap and tried to fight my growing anxiety. Nummer 31 wa beat gay and c zuternal 945. Number 31 wa, please proceed to door 0945. I reported to door 0945 and stood over the capital letter M. Orderly 2 handed me 2 more playing cards and said, you have 48 hours. I stepped over the threshold into the unknown. When my eyes adjusted to the light, I could see that I landed in London. I looked at the cards I'd been dealt: 4 of hearts, 2 of hearts, 8 of spades, 2 of spades. I had no idea. After 48 hours lapsed, I learned the consequences of failure: death. I've been strangled, beaten, stabbed, shot and blown up more times than I care to remember. Every time, I reanimated back in my living room at square one. It took me months to arrange the cards in the right order. Several more passed before I figured out that they were the coordinates to the Eiffel Tower. I can't begin to describe what it took to get there without a passport. I learned the meaning of to, duet, chappie, though. It's French. Spelled tout doit échapper, it means, you must escape. I learned this when I said it to a Parisian host. She replied in English, success is the only escape. Years passed before I realized that I needed to find the passage before a specific time. It only took a couple of tries before I connected the number on the door to military time. Go me. It took the longest to pick the right letter to pass over. There were 7 in all: C, D, I, L, M, V, and X, each lead to a different country with new landmarks and new obstacles. Behind every puzzle I solved, another puzzle waited. If I failed, I died a horrible death and started from the beginning. After a dozen or so encounters, I learned what Angela meant by wrong past, right future. Occasionally, I stumbled into my own world or a similar one, years into the past. A crucial piece of history catastrophically altered, ended life as I remembered it. Sometimes it was an abominable future where humans were enslaved by machines or worse. In all this I found an anchor in Angela. I encountered her in every phase of her life. I saw her as a small child, an adolescent and an adult. She exuded so much courage. She'll probably never know how much I admired her. It didn't matter, though. In my last run, I came close enough to work out the last challenge once and for all. I walked through the following series of doors: M, M, L, I, V, X, X, V. When I stepped through the final door I landed decades beyond my current time. A dirty yellow tinge stained the sky. Ruins stretched out as far as I could see. In the distance figures combed the debris. On the ground, I saw a newspaper. The headline read, "All is lost," in large red letters. I looked at the date. April 25, 2050. It took 6 months to succumb to the poison in the air, but I finally made it back to square one. I finally knew how to get home, but it would still take weeks to execute the code completely. First, I had to save Angela. After multiple failures, I found her in Prague at a telephone booth, talking on the phone. She was much older than I at this point, but unmistakably her. I overheard what she was saying into the receiver. "Tu dois t'échapper. You must escape." Though I know it wasn't meant for me, I know now, I am the one who received it. Her eyes widened when she finally recognized me. She wanted to know if I made it back to the real world. I shook my head. She asked if I knew anything that would help send her home. I nodded. I leaned in and whispered the secret into her ear. I left her standing inside the booth and found a quiet place to die. 32 hours later, I was taken by a mob and drowned in the Bohemian Sea. When I arrived again in the room, I plotted the long course home. Mxvi 925, September 25, 2018. So the apartment is 3 bedrooms 1 bath. There's only 6 months left on the lease. I can cut you a deal on the rent if you like. I just need to find a place anywhere else. Story 10, The Breather. Hello everyone. My name is Tyler and I live in a small town in Pennsylvania. I have lived here all my life in the same house for 18 years. I am currently 23 years old. I know this town inside and out. This place is nothing special. But every so often I witness something. The kind of things that could only happen and go unnoticed in a place like this. I have many stories to tell about this place and the unexplained goings-on. But for now I'd like to focus on one of, if not the most horrifying of the events. Let us begin. October 2013. I was 18, just out of high school. Still here in this same boring old town trying to decide what to do with my life. My mom was out late and wouldn't be home till the following afternoon. I could do whatever I wanted. So I had some friends over. My 3 friends, Jerome age 16, Charles age 17, and Tony age 16. They were staying the night, the 4 of us sitting up playing video games on my Xbox, eating piles of junk food and drinking soda. We had a 4th friend along named Mike, but he ditched us around 10:30 to go get high and probably contract herpes from his girlfriend. Don't do drugs, kids. These guys were so lazy they made me feel lazy, and I spent almost all my time at home playing video games being lazy. So I decided it was time for a break and get some fresh air. We all got our shoes on. Jerome and Tony both wearing some skater sneakers, Charles in some sandals and me in the same steel toe boots I wore every single day. Still do. Well, different pair now, but my attire hasn't changed much in that time. Jerome wore some baggy ripped jeans and a white hoodie, before you ask. Yes, he is white. Tony a pair of shorts and a band t-shirt. Charles a tank top and also black gym shorts. Me a pair of straight leg jeans, a light grey shirt and my usual leather jacket. Wish I still had that damn thing, it was nice. Expensive too. The time was around 1:45 a.m. when we headed outside. Few glories of being an adult. Even though they were all under 18, I was allowed outside past curfew, and as long as I was there so were they, so we expected no trouble even if our 2 town cops were colossal dickheads. After walking for a short bit we decided to head for the Rails to Trails. Now the Rails to Trails is a small dirt and gravel path that flows along the Susquehanna River. It leads through 3 different towns, all connected by a single highway road. My town was the one in the center, so go too far on one end and you'll end up in the other one, go too far the other way, same thing. We headed on the path at the bottom of a hill by a church next to a bridge. This path gets a lot of traffic during the summer and spring due to the nice weather. But this was late fall, almost winter, when this path gets a lot less traffic, and well, this late at night none at all. We went along the path in the dark using our phones to light the way, talking and joking. This path had and still has no lights whatsoever on it. You weren't supposed to be on it late at night like this, not that we cared. It was nice, warm enough to be out but cool enough not to sweat even in our attire. The path eventually leads to an old factory. Not sure what it was for, but it shut down long before I was born. My grandma once told me her father worked there back in its heyday. Shortly after the factory, around the bend there came a bridge over a small creek, or if you're from the northern states you likely pronounce it crick. This creek was part of the river but was cut off from the rest. It never went more than knee-deep, whereas the river itself gets high enough to swim in. We crossed the bridge and continued along the gravel path around the bend under a train bridge. Now shortly after the old train bridge you pass under, there's one more bend, and right after it there's an old bench with a bike rack. Next to it is a smaller wooden bridge. It was before this bend when Charles, who was walking beside me at this point, suddenly stopped. He shined his light onto what looked to be a path. "Hey, check it out," he said, causing the rest of us to all turn in confusion. Jerome was the first to say anything. "What? It's just a hunting trail." Tony butted in next. "I've never seen it before." My follow-up was simple. "I've been back here countless times and I've never seen it either." Jerome gave me a look and said, "Well, should we check it out?" The three of us stood there for a moment before deciding to follow the trail and see where it led, a decision we would later come to regret. We stepped through the opening under the low-hanging branches of the trees onto the path. It was all dirt, barely visible other than the obvious wear of having been walked on many, many times by someone. I led the pack, as not only the oldest but also the glorified and seemingly unofficially appointed leader of our little group of friends. At the front, using the flashlight of my smartphone, I walked, staying close behind me, and by close I mean I could practically feel him breathing, was Jerome. Behind him was Tony, with Charles bringing up the rear. We walked for a while with nothing but the sound of crickets and small animals in the night. Not a word spoken between us. Now I'm not the bravest guy, especially when it comes to the woods, so I was a little freaked out, but not enough to turn back just yet. I could only imagine how the others felt. Now, despite where I'm from, I hate nature and the woods. I don't like insects, I don't hunt, I don't fish, I don't like to camp, I don't go mudding, I don't just randomly ride dirt bikes or ATVs, and I certainly don't go out in the woods and get drunk while shooting guns at nothing. I don't enjoy the simple country activities most people from this region do. Actually, I detest them all. I prefer staying home with a cold drink, mindless electronic entertainment, and not to get dirty. That hasn't changed a bit, and this event sure didn't make me want to change it. We had been on the path for about 15 minutes. No one had any cell service but me, and I only had one single bar. Barely enough to make a 911 call. That's when we heard it. A loud crack of a stick or twig breaking behind us. All three of us shot around. We quickly scanned the woods around us and saw nothing. We decided to go a little further. Every so often we'd hear the brush move or snap, maybe some leaves crunching, but never once did we find the source. We decided to turn back. Our positions had reversed, Charles at the front, Tony behind him, followed by Jerome, then myself. After a few minutes of walking we could hear it. The breathing. Low, raspy. Like the sound of a dying animal caught in a trap or under something heavy. Like a dying old man on a respirator. Now, I don't know how many of you are gamers, but perhaps you'll get what I'm saying. If not, it'll be easy for you to find online. In Resident Evil 4, in the final act, there is a section where you fight a creature called a regenerator. In the game, the only way to kill them is to use a thermal scope to see inside them and kill the parasites that give them life. They make a very distinct sound. A sound that anyone who has ever been to this section will know at a moment's notice. A sound so iconic it's burned into the minds of all who have heard it. A high-pitched, low-toned, raspy, heavy, struggling, breathing sound. This sound was so similar that I swear I had momentary flashbacks to the first time I saw one in the game. So close that I couldn't even fully distinguish the difference, and the others, as I came to find out later, thought the same thing I did. We searched around with our lights and saw nothing. At this point we'd had enough. Jerome and Charles both grabbed large branches to use as protection. I carried a pocket knife with me everywhere at this time for reasons that aren't relevant to this story. I pulled it from my pocket and flicked it open. Now it wasn't anything impressive, just a small serrated blade that tucked into the handle, a cheap little knife I got at Walmart. Now I know how to use a knife. Unlike most people having multiple friends and family in the military, I learned the correct way to hold, stand and swing a blade. Something you would think is common knowledge, but around here it's not. In fact, it's so uncommon that I've actually had people who have seen me hold the knife question why I was holding it that way or directly insult and try to correct me. People are idiots. Tony did something that he always does. He put in his fucking headphones. He must have done it during the walk before turning around. Those annoying little black earbuds. He always turned up the music on his little MP3 so loud he couldn't hear anything. He did this so often that the rest of us have openly threatened multiple times to break those damned things. It wasn't that we minded every once in a while, but he would do it when we were speaking to him and wouldn't hear a word we said. Worst of all, he would walk so incredibly slow with those in. Like we could get from his house to mine on the other end of town only to realize his ass is barely halfway there with those damned things in his ears. Now was not the time, and like always he did it anyway. He was managing to stay in his place, so we assumed he would, but if not, it was agreed without his knowing that if anything at all happened I would cut the wire and make him listen. We stayed in formation walking along the trail, still hearing it. That damn breathing. It seemed to come from all directions once while also being close and far away and loudest in a specific spot that kept changing. We kept scanning the woods with our lights as we walked. I heard a loud crack behind me and turned around, shining my light. Nothing again. I decided to walk backwards a bit to keep an eye on the back. I grabbed onto Jerome's hoodie so I wouldn't fall behind. Then we heard a distinct crunch, a crunch that could only be bones. It was followed by a small and faint squeal. We shine our lights and saw a small rabbit, its fur white as snow, which was uncommon here for wild rabbits. There was blood and what appeared to be a large bite taken out of its back. Something had bitten into it. Then the breathing started again and another stick snapped. This one was loud enough to make us all jump. Run! Charles screamed and we all hightailed it as fast we would back to the main gravel path. As we approached the path we felt salvation was within our grasp. Hitting the path we ran to the bridge above the creek. We had paused to catch our breath. It was there we came to a realization. Tony wasn't with us. We had left him back there. I wasn't about to leave that damned fool to die. We went back and found the opening of the trail. Not far back was Tony, his headphones in, walking slow as ever right toward us. We could hear it. That damned breathing sound again. It was close to him, louder than ever before. Jerome and I both ran to him. I got behind him and started pushing him with my back while Jerome grabbed his arm. Tony took out his earbuds. "Hey, what's the big idea leaving me in the woods, you dicks?" he asked us. "Tony, you fucking idiot, you realize we're..." I paused. I could see a thin faint silhouette in the moonlight. It was only about 10 paces from where I stood. I watched its foot take a step with every step we took. I heard Jerome running away and Tony looked back. Tyler. What is that?" he said. From the silhouette it looked to stand about 6'5", taller than any of us. As a frame of reference, I'm only 5'11" tall. Jerome and Tony are the tallest, both standing at 6 feet 1 inch. Charles at an even 6 foot. I shined my light toward it, another choice I quickly came to regret. Its skin was filthy and pale. Like a man who hasn't been out in the sun for days or weeks. Not grey, but just a very pale white. Dirt all over its feet and legs. That about all I saw of its body, because I soon saw the last thing I wanted to. That unmistakable, red-crimson blood. Dripping onto the ground at its feet. I dropped my light and as it fell I caught a short glimpse of its body. It was covered in blood. My phone hit the dirt and before I could move Tony was already running. The light shined right on my face. I think it saw the fear in my expression because soon after I saw in the faint moonlight ghastly yellow elongated and journal teeth drenched in blood, blood dripping from its chin. Now I'll be honest with you. I don't know if that is what it really looked like or if in my terror my brain filled my eyes with images I already knew, given it was already similar to the creature I compared it to, in my own head. It let out the loudest, most blood-curdling scream imaginable, like a banshee mixed with a little girl in terror, but also like a bat that just got grabbed by its wings. I didn't think before I could. My legs were carrying me as fast as they could back onto the gravel path. In the pitch black of the night I had no way of even seeing my hand in front of my face. I only knew I was on the path because I could hear the gravel beneath my boots. Before long I found the guys, back at the bridge with their lights on waiting for me. I stopped to catch my breath and we listened. Other than the sound of my heavy tired gasps for air in the cold, there was silence. What the hell was that thing? Tony exclaimed. I saw its shape, but that's it. I took off. Jerome followed up. The three of them looked at me as if waiting to hear an explanation. Between breaths I explained what I saw. Finally I told them that I had left my phone and had to go get it. They offered their arguments and I told them I had no choice. I took Charles' phone and using his light headed back, telling them to go ahead. It wasn't long before Jerome came running up to me. I'm not letting you go alone. The others are going to wait at the bridge. He swung his big stick over his shoulder and smiled at me as if determined not to let me die alone. Who knows, maybe we'll kill us a monster. I shot him a wicked smile. I admit, I was mostly just trying to hide my own fear. We found the path and could see my light. We turned off the light from Charles' phone. I nudged at Jerome. All right, go get it, I told him. I'm not going. It's your phone, he replied. You're bigger than me and you've got a big stick, I shot back in response. You've got the knife, he told me. I sighed a deep sigh to try and calm my nerves and handed him the phone. He gave me the branch he had and I set onto the path, ducking under the low-hanging branches. I slowly stepped, listening for any sound, any movement, any breathing at all. I got to my phone and slipped my knife into my pocket. Putting the large branch over my shoulder, I knelt down and grabbed my phone in the dirt. I turned around and saw only a black mass before me. That fucking sound right in front of me, low, raspy, but now. Excited breathing. Light shined from behind it and I heard Jerome's voice. Tyler, it's right there. I felt a drip land on my boot, the sound of it splattering. In a moment's notice I swung the branch and heard it snap and crack as whatever was before me fell to the side. I dropped the remaining half of the branch and ran right back to Jerome, whom had already begun to run. Hitting the path, I looked back and shined my light. It was running at me. I caught only a glimpse as I dug into my pocket for my knife. The scream again echoed into the night. I didn't stop. I kept running, Jerome's light visible in front of me, the sound of bare feet hitting gravel and heavy out of breath rasping behind me. Before long it began to fall back. Slowly the sound became fainter and fainter until I could hear it no more. Jerome hit the bridge before me and the three all looked back with light. I saw relief on their faces. I made it to them and while trying to catch my breath again. Holy shit, are you okay? Jerome asked me. Yeah. Yeah, I think so, I told him. Charles spoke up, clearly shaken. We could hear the screaming. What happened? Tyler smacked that fucking thing right in the head. Jerome said. His tone sounded as if he enjoyed it. Ty. You've got blood on you, Tony said as Charles placed his light over me. There was dry blood on my jacket and on my right pant leg as well as my boot. I think I knocked a couple of that bastard's teeth out, I said with a chuckle. We heard the water under the bridge splash. Like it had been stepped in. We wasted no time picking up the pace. We got our bearings and started heading back toward the factory quickly, but not running so as to save energy and calm ourselves. As we approached the bend before the factory, we heard another crunch of bones followed by that fucking breathing. We turned back and there, coming out of the woods and landing on the path, was another dead rabbit. In its hide was a tooth. We'd had enough and took off. We didn't stop running until we hit the safety of the street lights by the church. We headed back to my home and agreed to bring others back in the morning. I cleaned off my jacket and boots with peroxide and tossed the jeans in the garbage after wrapping them up in plastic and putting them in a Walmart bag. I made some calls and gathered some friends. The sun was up and it was about 9 a.m. when we head back. I only got about an hour of sleep myself. The others, I assume, didn't fare much better. As we reached the point of the dead rabbit, we found nothing. No blood, no body, no hide, not even the tooth. As we made it to the bridge, we still found nothing. The water looked undisturbed, and all this time along the gravel no distinct marks or blood stains. The now group of 9 people got to the point of the path. It was gone. The brush was grown the same as all the rest. No distinct low-hanging dead branches. No dirt path. No noticeable marks or dry blood. It was like the path just disappeared. We moved the brush along and worked out way past it. No path at all to be found. No blood of teeth. Not even the broken branch where I knew damn well I cracked that motherfucker in the head. Just nothing at all. The others never believed us. But the four of us. We all remember it. The others and I slowly drifted apart over the years. But before deciding to post this, I asked the others if they remembered that night. All three of them did. All three remember what we heard. What we saw. The blood. The branch. The breathing. The bones. The rabbits. All of it. I've gone back there on the trails before at night. Alone. Multiple times. I never found the path again. But the last time I went, not too long ago, maybe a few weeks at best, I heard it. The breather. He remembered me. You could tell by the excited sound of his asthmatic breath. Thank you all for reading. I hope you enjoyed. I have more stories of unexplainable happenings and events to happen in this town. If you have any questions, feel free to ask and I'll answer what I can. Story 11, Peeling. My insomnia has gotten worse lately. I don't know if it's just the transition from living at home to living on campus, or a return to a childhood struggle with anxiety, but most nights in the past month or so I haven't been falling asleep until well into the morning. Luckily, my college campus is safe, with a lake and small trails through temperate Virginia woodlands, so I've taken to going on late-night jogs. I always like to keep an eye out for wildlife on these excursions, mostly spotting geese or rodents but occasionally seeing larger animals like raccoons or foxes. A week ago, I saw something different. It was pitch dark, and around 1 in the morning, still too early for drunk partygoers to be stumbling back to their dorms. I was basically alone. The path I was taking was on a longish bridge over a dip in the ground, and through the pounding of my feet I heard what sounded like a human voice. It was high-pitched and soft, almost melodic, the same tone someone may talk to a sleeping child with. "Baby sweet," it breathed. "Baby sweet." I paused, looking around in the trees, convinced that it was just some weird kid trying to play a prank. To my dismay, I couldn't spot the source before it continued. "Baby sweet, darling, you run so fast, from what?" Honestly, I had never been good in stressful situations and my heart raced as my throat closed up with anxiety. I tried to choke out a reply, but I just couldn't get it out. Suddenly, I saw two wide, pupil-less eyes open in the darkness, glowing with moonlight like a cat's eyes do under a flashlight. Trying to escape? From what? "Baby sweet, quit your running and you can see baby girl, little one, sugar bee, you'll be able to see." It spoke faster now, moving towards me. As I adjusted to the dark, I could get a glimpse of what was actually speaking. It looked like a man, a stretched-out man with owl eyes. His spine was long and flexible and his movements were cat-like, graceful almost, which made the horrific pulsing of his skinless muscles contracting and loosening as he moved towards me so much more sickening. I tried to look away, but locked in with fear, all I could do was stare into those horrible silver dollar eyes. It paused inches from my face, twisted body perched on the railing of the bridge like some emaciated gargoyle. Eye to eye with it, I could smell its hot sugary breath on my face. Tears streaked from my face as I spoke to it, hoping that would get it to leave. "I'm scared," I managed to whisper. The creature blinked once, making an audible clicking sound as its thick moist eyelids slowly met. "Oh darling, we all are, baby girl, baby sweet, just find what's underneath that fear." As it spoke, it raised its snarled hands to grab my shoulders. Slimy and moist, its touch is what finally managed to break me out of whatever trance I had fallen into. In one motion I ripped away from it, sprinting back to my dorm with dizzying darkness encroaching on my vision. My roommate wasn't there when I arrived, thankfully, and I sank to the floor after slamming the door closed. I noticed that it had left half-moon-shaped nail cuts in my skin where it had gripped me, with a thin line of blood dripping down my arm. I guess the adrenaline had stopped me from feeling the pain. I don't remember when I finally managed to fall asleep, but the next morning I woke up surprisingly well rested. I would have chalked the previous night's experience up to an odd dream, but the cuts from the creature were still imprinted where I had saw them earlier. Before my first class, I cleaned them up and put rubbing alcohol on them, the sting reassuring me that it would kill whatever filth that thing might have had under its nails. During class I caught myself picking at them absent-mindedly several times, pulling at the scabs and the edges of my skin. This isn't an uncommon habit for me, but I knew it might cause it to scar, so I tried my best to stop myself. In between classes, I stopped by my dorm to bandage it. The wounds weren't big enough to call for that, but at the very least it would stop me from messing with the little wounds. This, however, ended up not working. In my biology lecture, I noticed the person next to me give me a look of disgust. Initially I was offended, but then I saw the bandages laying all around me, blood on my fingers. Blood on my fingers? I silently cursed myself as I collected the now gross bandages and tried my best to wipe off my hands. The wounds were considerably more open now, pink slits of flesh in my otherwise smooth skin. God! I'd never been that bad about scratching at anything before. That night I decided I wouldn't do my normal nightly wanderings and went straight to bed, wrapping up my shoulders in extra layers. Thankfully, sleep came easy for once. A relief, for once. Morning, however, was less easy. I woke up to a sick saccharine smell, my roommate still MIA. As I shifted in bed, I realized that all my sheets were stuck to me. I peeled them off painfully, and when I turned on the light I realized what had happened. In my sleep I had ripped off of my bandages. There was blood all over my bed and sheets and body, this thick sick sugary sweet blood. I ripped into my skin in my sleep and I peeled back the skin around the cuts, It's been days and I haven't left my dorm. I don't know where my roommate went, but he never came back to the room. I can't stop peeling off my skin. God, it disgusts me, but every time I lose absolute focus my hands just go back to peeling, grabbing the long strips of free-hanging skin and unwinding it like some kind of hang nail. Everything smells sweet. Everything smells sweet.